Okay, so we are live, so I'll play the video. Thank you.
Happy International Day of Families to you all. I welcome the participants from all over the world to this annual United Nations observance of the International Day of Families. You know, technology gives us an opportunity to broadcast to the world and keep close socially despite our physical distance. And as you may know, this year we have officially started the preparation for the 30th anniversary of the International Year of the Family to be celebrated in the year 2024. So as part of the preparations, we will be exploring the impact of megatrends on families. And what megatrends are, well, we are going to tell you what we mean by that and what the trends will have the biggest impacts on families. It's another thing that we will be approaching during this meeting. And you know, after some consideration and taking into account the United Nations priorities in general and the Department of Economic and Social Affairs in particular, we chose to follow themes that for the upcoming years will be leading to the 30th anniversary of the International Year of the Family in the year 2024. What are these? Well, new technologies this year, urbanization and migration next year, demographic changes in the year 2023, and climate change in the year 2024. What we will do is to conduct research and organize advocacy and awareness-raising events to assess the impact of these trends on families, and also recommend policies and programs to harness their benefits and protect families from their negative consequences. And this year we're starting with new technologies, and not a moment too soon as due to the COVID-19 pandemic. And we became sometimes overwhelmingly so dependent on reliable internet access and digital technology tools to communicate, work, and learn from home. And frankly, if not for new technologies, the world's economies would greet to a halt. Yet, not all are included in this new digital world, and not all families have access to the internet and new technologies, either because of knowledge or because of financial means, or because there is no broadband. In fact, half the world's population, an estimated 3.7 billion people, is still offline, and families without the access to internet face more challenges to provide for their children, and moreover, digital and financial exclusion threatens their livelihoods and access to services. And I believe we learned a lot from the COVID-19 crisis. We realized that we have a critical opportunity to build more effective, inclusive, and resilient systems to protect vulnerable families and individuals, especially those living in extreme poverty. We know for sure that if we are to build an inclusive society, the digital divide cannot continue, and there is no doubt that access to the internet must be considered a universal right and has to be put at the heart of the global and national agendas. And new technologies help families organize their lives in more efficient ways in many areas, including communication, work, education, health, and finances, just to name a few. And importantly, digital technologies can be used for efficiency, delivery of services for families, and of course, the access to the internet is a source of information full of useful content and tools helping parents with their parenting responsibilities and ensuring healthy development of their children. The potential for the use of new technologies is immense, and it should be harnessed to benefit families worldwide. Let's commit to making digital technologies useful, reliable, and accessible to all families. And let's invest in digital skills for all families members, irrespective of gender, age, economy, social status, or abilities. So happy International Day of Families to you all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Daniela. Indeed, we are sharing very much your hope, and we are sure that the future for family is brighter. Welcome to the United Nations observance of the International Day of Families. To all of you who are following us on Facebook Live or UN Web TV. Today, we have a relevant topic under discussion. We will focus on new technologies, in particular, digital technologies and the impact on families. Primarily, we look at digital technologies and parenting education. It's really timely to focus on this topic in light of the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic. Parenting education is the bread and butter of our organization, the one that I'm the president of, which is the International Federation for Family Development. I am Olivier Yao from Côte d'Ivoire and the president of IFFD. Founded in 1978, IFFD is a non-governmental, independent, and non-profit umbrella organization for more than 240 family enrichment centers, and we operate in 70 countries, and our actions benefit more than 30,000 people annually through our parenting courses, which is based on the case method study. IFFD was granting in 2011 the reclassification as General Consultant at the United Economic and Social Council, ECOSOC, and IFFD advocates at International Organization for Parenting Education and is engaged with governments, academia, and the private sector for family-friendly policies. And today, in this event, the Division for Inclusive Social Development of the United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs is launching a very important document, a comprehensive background paper entitled Technologies, Use and Families, Implication for Work-Family Balance and Parenting Education. Our keynote speaker is the author of this background paper, Professor Susan Walker, who is the Associate Professor, Family Social Science and former Director of Parents and Family Education at the University of Minnesota. The emphasis of her teaching and research is on technology integration in family education, early childhood parenting and childcare policy, and parent learning through social interactions. Professor Walker, I hand over the floor to you to introduce that into your document. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Let me pull up my slide set here. Go. I am absolutely honored and thrilled to be here today, and especially to be on this esteemed panel of speakers. And I hope to be able to provide a framework that I believe will be a way for all of us collectively to work together to strengthen families in this critical area. It's critical, I believe, when we're looking at how quickly technology has come into our lives, personal computing and the internet, and the radical changes that have come to play, for us to make our plan by reflecting on the past, while we also consider what's going to happen in the future. To share a bit of a personal story, how my own work pivoted somewhat to focus on families and technology. When my daughter was 13, we had moved from Washington, D.C. to Minnesota. And now when I was 13, my family had also moved across the country. And back then, if I wanted to connect with my friends back where I lived, I would write a letter. Yes, we did have phones, but back then, if you wanted to make a phone call, it was long distance and it was very expensive. So when my daughter's 13, I come home and I see her connecting with her friends, but she's got one kid on the video conferencing. She's got another kid on speakerphone. She's connecting with several other kids through instant messaging, and I'm pretty sure composing an email. And I was just astounded that she was not only using all of these devices and technologies at the same time, but she was using them together so comfortably. And I thought, in my world of parenting education, if we're not aware of the importance of these technologies in this 13-year-old's life, when she becomes a 23-year-old or a 33-year-old parent in our program, we're going to completely miss the boat. They're going to be having so many expectations about the way that information is shared and exchanged that it's critical that we understand what their interests are. So reflecting on our past, I think, is very important for us to understand the magnitude of what technologies have meant. And without romanticizing the past too much, I think it will also inform us on what we can hold on to and that is precious. So then, looking to the future, there are groups such as the Pew American Internet and American Life Project that have interviewed experts about what we can anticipate our future to look like with technology. They use words like unthinkable scale and massive disruption when they look ahead. They also will look at the positives about what technology has brought to our lives, but also recognize some of the challenges. So on one hand, of course, technology means greater convenience and efficiencies. So the future looks tele-everything, right? Smart devices of all kinds and our dependence on artificial intelligence. We'll have greater opportunities for creative expression and work, as we've seen through COVID, will become far more flexible. We'll be less dependent on time or place to get work done. On the other hand, they also are predicting a growing racial and social inequality, worsening problems with security and privacy, and furthering misinformation. People's mental health will continue to be challenged, and families will be facing job insecurities due to the employment shifts around automation and on-demand types of jobs. This picture from the New York Times back in February, they ran a series called The Primal Scream, was focusing on the challenges that families were facing during COVID, specifically working mothers. And here we can see both the affordances of technology that enabled this mom to continue working from home, at the same time, the challenges that she may have faced with being able to attend to the needs of her child. I do believe that as we look forward, one of our responsibilities as educators is going to be to support parents in boundary management. So as we look forward, it's very important, I think, for us to not only focus on the technological changes that are afoot, but also for us to understand the way that technology is being used, because I believe that that is going to be a real key to family well-being. When we can do that and create a future for families, and as well as prepare families for the future, we'll be doing what Jonas Salk has asked us to do, which is that the most important question we ask ourselves is, are we being good ancestors? I'm going to frame my policy recommendations around using Bronfenbrenner's bioecological perspective of human development. This may be familiar to many of you. In this model, the unique characteristics of the individual are then influenced by interactions with a variety of settings over time. The influence from the most proximal settings are those that we interact with on a regular basis, our family, our neighborhoods, our work, our school, things like that. From a micro or a macro system perspective, factors such as culture that trickle down and influence our norms and our beliefs, or government policies at this macro level. And then at the exosystem, this is a level that generally we don't have a direct interaction with, but still has an influence on our development. So for instance, if my husband's workplace changed their own policies about working from home, and that affects his presence and his behavior at home, that's going to affect me, which will eventually affect my development. So with this model in mind, let's first focus on the macro view. And we absolutely cannot talk about families' use of technology without talking about access. As previously noted, one of our biggest challenges is that not everyone around the world has access to the internet and access to devices. We see images like this, or we hear reports about the majority of people around the world having access to the internet, yet we need to look more closely at by country to see where these inequities lie. Largely, our access to the internet will correlate with countries that are more economically advantaged. We can also see then what this might mean for material deprivation when children don't have access to technology. In this figure, it represents countries in Europe, with the darker countries representing households with children 6 to 16 who have less access to the internet and to computers. What we've seen through COVID especially is this increasing digital divide. So the children who did not have access to technology were ones who were not able to participate in school, with some school teachers reporting that there were a good 10% of their classes who never logged in at all. So first and foremost, it is critical that we address inequities in internet access and regard internet access as a human right. And if we're providing access to this environment, it is also critical that we view these online spaces as being safe and secure and spaces that will protect human rights. I would see that if we can accomplish this, we are well on our way to achieving many of the targeted goal areas in Sustainable Development Goals. So then if we focus on the family, without a doubt, technology concerns by families is a tremendous concern. Folks like the Pew Research Center have done surveys with parents where they'll say that parenting now is harder than it was 20 years ago. And the number one reason that they'll point to is their children's use of technology. They'll see sensational headlines about the consequences to their children's development. And these headlines will be backed by research that seem to point to just about every aspect of children's growth through sleep, through obesity and body weight, from brain development and learning and social development, and impacts on children's mental health. So with these concerns, they are very happy when there are government bodies around the world in their individual countries through pediatric associations that will offer guidelines on screen time. I will note that after COVID, many parents are also feeling guilty because those screen time limits have been violated. It's critical, I believe, though, for parents to also get the counter message about the positive benefits of using technologies in children's lives. There is a growing body of research about the value of connected learning, of opportunities for using digital devices that enhance specific learning abilities, creativity, collaboration, having a platform for stronger identity development and personal expression. And we also cannot ignore the fact that these technologies are offering children the exact same kind of digital skills that will benefit them as they move to the future. And yet, it's critical that we come back away from this focus on technology to remember that even without technology in parents' lives, parenting is really, really hard. I know you know. And so while we are focused on technology as a current area of interest and concern by parents, we always have to come back to the basic job of parenting that is ongoing as parents are addressing additional concerns. And so it is with that my second policy recommendation is that we regard parenting education and family support as an important critical strategy that we add to our investment portfolio for families. we are providing tremendous resources to families, and these are critical: education, healthcare, safe drinking water, access to food. And these are important because, of course, having these will help to reduce the stresses that so often can lead to child abuse and neglect. But we can't ignore the challenge of being a parent, and especially in today's society, nor can we assume that every parent comes into the job feeling fully prepared. There are parents who come into the job of parenting who still need to repair from the damage done from their own childhood, and that will influence their parenting. We have decades and decades of research about the value of parenting education to strengthen the relationship between parents and children, to give parents the knowledge, the skills, the behaviors that help them feel even more able and competent as parents. So my advocacy is not that we replace the other resources, but that parenting education is seen as an additional asset in our portfolio. This graphic is from a UNICEF report from a few years ago, and I like it because it represents the complexity of parenting education. Parenting education is not a one-size-fits-all kind of program. It is easily adapted to meet the needs of individual families by culture, by context, depending on outcomes, whether we're focused on shorter-term outcomes or longer-term outcomes, outcomes related to the child, using different teaching strategies, different platforms, different contexts, and influenced by driving factors, including the involvement of international organizations. This chart on the left indicates outcome areas. And with this, you can see child, parent, parent-child, family relations, community, and both short and long-term outcomes. So you can see the rich array of outcomes that parenting education can focus on for the well-being of children and families. This also gives us a strong idea of the rich array of content that parenting education draws from. I have a representation here of the facets that I look at parenting education to include. So just like other education areas, there's a content area and there's pedagogy, or the teaching methods that are used to reach learning outcomes. But a unique characteristic of parenting education, which I'll talk about, are the relationships. So focusing again on content, we can see from this list that there is just tremendous content that parenting education can touch on. From a standpoint of pedagogy, parenting educators will deploy efforts one-to-one with families, maybe through home visits. They'll work in small groups. They may work online, preparing materials for a large number of people. There will be tailoring curricula to specific outcomes, as I mentioned, and again, a very strong focus on relationships. And then finally, relationships. As James Comer has said, no significant learning can occur without a significant relationship. And I absolutely love this because it gets to the heart of what parenting education really does too, which is to strengthen that relationship between the parent and the child. And in that relationship is the emotional context through which parents teach their children. Parents are their first and continuous learner across a child's life. So that warm, nurturing relationship is so key because it also enables the parent to be attuned to that child's individual needs. So parenting education focuses so greatly on relationships. It also focuses on relationships between parents and between the parenting educator and the parents. So that some of my own research with social learning and parenting education has determined the value of these connections in a trusted environment for parents to gain a sense of connections, of resources that continue to support them throughout their lives. What I found has actually mirrored some of the research from Australia on their playgroups, where they have determined that the social capital developed from parents' interactions together can be very, very beneficial to empowering parents. So relationships. So my second policy recommendation is that we start seeing parenting education more as a support strategy that we can add to our portfolio. And again, I believe that when we can do this and we see the connections that parenting makes to children's outcomes, that we will be farther in achieving the sustainable development outcomes. Now let's get back to technology. So once we have this system in place with strong parenting education, and it is offered worldwide, we have a perfect place then to help parents learn more about technology interactions with their children. Media scholars already have identified the value of the parent-child relationship for learning around media management. The General Comment 25 by the UN Committee for the Rights of the Child has noted that parental mediation is more effective if it prioritizes mutual empathy and respect over prohibition and control. This is precisely what we teach in parenting education. So again, with parents' multiple concerns over the types of devices that children are using and their exposure to online threats, parenting education is a way for them to not learn about technology and creating digital citizens as a one-off topic, something that a special speaker comes in for and addresses a group of parents, but is infiltrated within the practice of child rearing from the beginning, so that as parents are guiding and nurturing their children around social development, technology can be a part of that. When they're teaching their children how to drive, right? Technology is a part of it. It just gets folded into the everyday practice of what parents do. And when we can do that, it will be more lasting. The other wonderful thing is that there are so many fabulous materials that have been developed around media literacy. In just about every country of the world, there is an agency. We have our own fabulous Common Sense Media here in the United States. We also, in other countries, there are ministries that have provided media education. And these agencies then have perfect partners with parenting education to deliver the content. So it supports the parenting educator in having the content. It also helps to get messages across and again, embed it within parenting education. The other key is not just technology as a content area, but also technology in the delivery of education. If you remember my 13-year-old who will be 23 years old and 33 years old and come to parenting education with an expectation for how knowledge is shared and delivered, this is the key in terms of the delivery of programming using applications, using devices, mobile devices that parents are more familiar with and tailoring what we do to what parents need. I have a picture here of a platform that I developed with ECFE, with the Early Childhood Family Education Program in Minnesota. This is a long-term, low-dose type of parenting education that starts from birth, and parents come, any parent can join. They come when their children are babies and stay through when their children are 5 and meet on a weekly basis with other parents and licensed parenting educators and early childhood teachers. It's a fabulous program. And so in my partnership with ECFE, we designed technology, the Parentopia platform, because parents wanted a space to make connections in between weekly meetings to strengthen their relationships and also to have access to information about the program. So the great thing is we can not only have technology as a content area, but also in our ways that we deliver practice. Many of the evidence-based programs that we have with such rigorous research, and Mary's presentation will get into some of that depth of that research, have also adapted their programming now for being both online and being thoughtful about the use of these devices. So this is great. However, there's trouble in paradise, because when we now take a wider view and we understand the field of parenting education, sadly, even though it exists around the world, it is highly fragmented and is not at all centralized. Many of those who are offering parenting education maybe have been trained to a specific curriculum or model. Even in the United States, the National Parent Education Network has looked at state by state by state with different guidelines for preparation based on being a paraprofessional, a professional with a college degree or a teaching license. So there's great variation in how parenting educators are prepared. And then when you take a new area like technology integration, which is so critical to the delivery as well as the content, then there's no standard base for parenting educators to place that new content. In other professions, such as social work or teachers or therapists, they have standards that now have embedded technology in a very significant way. In my research with family educators in the United States, the majority of them will say that the way that they learn about technology is on their own. The other challenges that parenting educators will face is at the workplace. My research has also found a direct connection between workplace encouragement and workplace infrastructure, the resources provided, and parenting educators' technology attitudes and their acceptance and use in practice. The quotes that I have here are from a survey that we did with parenting educators in ECFE last spring when they had to adapt their programming to an online delivery. It was so sudden that they felt lost. They felt unprepared. They grieved for the loss of the relationships with families, and they acknowledged that many families would not be able to connect because of lack of access. The picture that I have featured here is of my friend Elizabeth's parenting education class. This is not all that old. And as you can see, she was gifted with an old television, and what's on that cart is an old VCR. So these are the workplace conditions that parenting educators are facing as well. So in conclusion, what I do believe is that we create a policy ecology that recognizes the needs at a very proximal level and offers parenting education as a steady practice that parents have access to, universal access. And through that parenting education, that content around technology is delivered, and we integrate technology in the delivery of parenting education. At a macro level, we address the fact that many families don't have access to technology, and that we ensure that access to the internet and access to devices is a human right, and we make sure that those spaces are safe and secure and protect digital rights. And then I implore us to start seeing those amazing professionals who are on the front lines and working with parents. They're often overlooked. And because parenting education to date has been so fragmented and decentralized, and we have kind of a lack of standards depending on who's delivering it, it is critical for us to also prepare this profession in their competence generally, but especially in their comfort and their knowledge in using technology in practice. So again, ensure internet access, include parenting education as a family support strategy, integrate technology in parenting education, and provide a system of supports and standards that empower parenting educator ability and confidence. I believe that when we work across the entire system or ecology for families, we are going to be more likely to achieve the sustainable development goals by preparing for families sustainable infrastructure. By doing this as well, it will make us good ancestors. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Susan. Indeed, this was quite impressive, and I do believe that this background paper will be very, very useful to the United Nations to prepare the 30th anniversary of the International Day of Families. Our next speaker is Zach Sims, who is the co-founder and CEO of Code Academy, an online learning platform for technical skills. Since its founding in 2011, Code Academy has helped over 50 million people in more than 190 countries to access economic opportunity through technology. And its goal is to close the technical gap and transform people's lives through engaging, flexible, and accessible online education. Before handing over to Sims, I would like to mention to all our participants on Facebook Live that they can start now asking their questions. So on Facebook Live, you can ask your questions and they will be answered right after all the panelists have completed their presentation. Sims, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much. All right. Share my screen with all of you. Perfect. All right. So as Olivia mentioned, my name is Zach Sims, and I am the co-founder and CEO of Code Academy. And at Code Academy, our mission is to connect millions of people around the world with economic opportunity. And we do that today by teaching them modern skills online, like programming, web development, and data science in a way that is engaging, accessible, and flexible. So today, I'm going to talk a little bit more about how we've been able to scale that education to more than 50 million people around the world, and what the potential consequences are, and kind of from what we've learned about families, new technologies, and ways we can use online education tools to keep parents in the workforce and to help families stay together. Great. So I want to start by talking about the rise of online education and the impact it's had on families around the world. COVID-19 over the past year obviously has forced a lot of people around the world to be locked down and stay inside their homes. And as a result, we've seen this really unprecedented boom in online learning. I think this is most pronounced in K-12, where we tend to see a lot of people that are learning online because schools are no longer allowed, or were no longer allowed to keep people learning in person. But it's also happening a lot at the adult level for adults that are looking to further develop in their careers, whether it's getting a new job or up-leveling in their existing job. And I think what we've learned from this real increase in online learning is just there are tremendous advantages to a world in which more people are learning online, or more people are learning in a hybrid fashion, both with in-person schooling and an online complement to that. What we've seen over the past year is that there's been a fourfold increase, according to the World Economic Forum, in people that are seeking these online learning opportunities. And so we don't expect that to change over the course of the future. And if anything, that should only increase as people realize that you don't have to be in a physical place in order to learn a particular skill, but really you can learn anywhere. And so when we think of kind of what we've learned over the past several years about what makes for good online education and what helps people advance, there's three really core key pillars. The first is engagement. So we see that online learning opportunities that are interactive and give people something to sink into, as opposed to just kind of watching a video or lean back learning, as we'd refer to it, leads to higher retention of knowledge and also faster learning as well. Second key pillar for us is accessibility. So for us, that means kind of trying to keep that learning as inexpensive as possible. So you've seen the rise of a lot of freemium models over the course of the past several years, where people are allowing the majority of their learning to be available for free online. And in many cases, if there is a paid component, it's $10, $20 a month in some countries, with an effort to keep it much more affordable than the classic $50,000 a year secondary education or college experience that many people are used to. As well, what the internet does is allow for online education to provide a much more scalable learning experience for people. So, using technology to help where teachers might not necessarily be able to. And lastly, we see that flexibility is a major pillar of online learning as well, which I think is particularly relevant for our conversation as well today, where people are starting to integrate that online learning and self-development into their own schedules, which is particularly pertinent for parents and caregivers. So as we look at a couple of the major trends that technology is enabling, I think one of the first is keeping parents in the workforce through technology. So what we've seen, especially over the course of the past year, is that online skills-based education allows parents around the world to invest in and advance their careers in a way that fits with their schedules, whether that's parenting, working, or responsibilities elsewhere. And we've seen this trend at Codecademy kind of in a particularly pronounced fashion from the beginning of the company, but more so over the course of the past year as well. Two quick examples. Kate is a Codecademy learner who's a stay-at-home mom for 15 years who decided to pick up programming online. And after teaching herself, became kind of a full-time software engineer for a security company. And during the pandemic, unfortunately, her husband ended up losing his job. And so she ended up becoming the sole provider for their family. So kind of the ability to perform traditional, to kind of balance work and a personal life, I think because of technology is even more pronounced today. Our second learner, Michael, decided to get serious about learning to code in 2019 and learned with Codecademy for every day over the course of a year. And while he was a stay-at-home parent to his two kids. And since then, he's also started a new job and started to teach his own kids how to program as well. And so I think what we're seeing is that, online learning to that point, again, really allows working parents to both learn and up-level themselves at the same time as they're parenting. And so, online education, we've noticed, while it enables more people around the world to start learning, remote work and flexible work experiences also help parents as they start to juggle personal and professional responsibilities. So being able to do everything in the same place tends to be beneficial as well. So as we also look at improving digital technologies for working parents, I think there are a couple of different ways to improve parenting through technology. I think the biggest thing that we've seen is, again, online education and remote work are here to stay. And so we think these trends are demonstrably important for the future and will keep parents in the workforce going forward. But I think kind of the biggest thing getting in the way of keeping more parents in the workforce and having technology have a positive effect on that are access and public perception. And so we've seen there are ways for public-private partnerships to have kind of very unique opportunity to have an impact on these digital technology trends for parents as well. As we look at some of these, I think online education tends to be really easily scalable, and so the ability for educational organizations like Codecademy to partner with folks like we have over the course of the past year, for example, with the City of New York, with the State of New York, to provide good educational access to people that are at home and learning and parenting at the same time is critical. And I think what we've seen is that there are policymakers that can truly influence these public perceptions about online education as well. And hopefully, encouraging people to realize that learning online shouldn't carry a stigma and can be just as important as learning offline as well. So I think as we look at the future and kind of how technology can help enable families around the world, this combination of what we've seen from remote work, but also people up-leveling themselves and learning remotely over the course of the past year, I think are trends that will be here to stay and hopefully will enable people to balance those personal and professional obligations over time as well. So with that, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you very much, Zach. Indeed, engagement, accessibility, and flexibility are key points to enable parents to embrace learning. And from what you have just told us, we are confident that there's no limit of age when it comes to learning. And this will be as well useful for our parents into learning how to better do the parenting. Our next speaker is Amina Fazlullah. She represents Common Sense Media, and where she is the Director of Equity Policy. She works on privacy, expanded access to technology, and digital well-being. Fazlullah, can you tell us more? The floor is yours.
Thanks for having me today. So my focus today is to talk about how we can get access to the underlying networks that drive all of these benefits that we have just been talking about, that we derive through technology for families. And maybe I should start by saying that one of the main reasons why policymakers and private industry should consider driving deeper into building broadband infrastructure and supporting telecommunications in their countries is because, first and foremost, it also promotes resilience within the family, within the community that the family lives in, and within the country overall. When you have access to these types of technologies, families can be better prepared and more nimbly shift to address a crisis. And again, in all the various ways that our colleagues have just been talking about. Then also, the governments that provide essential services, that are working with their most vulnerable citizens, have many more options on the table to delivering those essential services to their citizens. So in a time of crisis, those types of alternative pathways to deliver something. So for example, whether it's healthcare through telemedicine, shifting more folks to going to telemedicine first to help save on pressure within an actual in-person inpatient setting, or to save on PPE, where you may have limited supplies. That type of resilient alternative option is really important to just the healthy delivery of these essential services that the government will provide, including education to resiliently shift to be able to provide distance learning, including workforce, so being able to resiliently shift to being able to do remote work, and the delivery of additional government services. So if you do have a population that's experiencing some kind of economic loss, and suddenly everybody needs to apply for unemployment insurance or rental assistance, having long lines is very difficult in the midst of the pandemic. It's important to try to shift people to applying for those benefits online. The value for government is just as valuable as it is to the individual family. And the impact on government of having to navigate the digital divide because of what it means for the delivery of these essential services is also valuable. Costs rise when you have no virtual options, when you don't have the underlying infrastructure in place. So what do governments and private industry, what can they do to cover these gaps? We know that prioritizing funding for the deployment of infrastructure is really important. And keeping in mind the goals of what you'd like to do with that infrastructure, I think, is also really critical when you're deploying that infrastructure. So at Common Sense, we have done some research on, what are the technology specifications to be able to do at least one essential service, right? Online learning, so distance learning. And what we found was to do really robust distance learning, you wanted to have about 210 Mbps. That's relatively high, depending on where you live in terms of what that means for the underlying infrastructure you have in place. But that's really important to know, because any internet doesn't just promise great distance learning. Certain technical specifications are required to do all of the sort of synchronous sort of tutoring that you want to do, or to be able to take advantage of the sort of full breadth of innovations that are available. So it's important for government and for industry to have in mind, what are the use cases that society is seeking out right now? And what are those technical specifications? So that when they are actually deploying infrastructure, they're building infrastructure that meets today's needs. Now, the second piece of that is that we don't often build infrastructure. And so, when you do have the opportunity to put government funds or private funds into deploying infrastructure, it's really important that you're building with an eye towards the future. You want to make sure that you're putting in the ground the most robust technology possible, so that you are not coming back to it every 2, 5, 10 years. You want to have that investment last as long as possible. And we don't yet know all of the different innovations that will come down the road that we'll want to take advantage of. And the other piece of that is, it also allows governments and government providers, again, of essential services to plan, to understand, okay, these are the technologies that are available. They reach all of my communities. Here are the technological innovations that I can use in the educational space, in the healthcare space, in upskilling and remote work. Once you have a sense of what's actually available to you in the underlying infrastructure and how long it will last you, you can start building these really effective programs. You can train teachers. But if you don't have that underlying infrastructure, you have this patchwork and this sort of stuttered stop-start to taking advantage of innovations. And I'll give you just one example of that. At the start of the pandemic, many schools in the United States understood that they would need to quickly shift to distance learning. But they quickly learned that many of their students didn't have access or high quality access to broadband at home. And what that meant was that many schools shut down completely when they realized that they couldn't offer equitable access to education, that some of the students in their classroom would be able to do distance learning online, and then others would be left with paper packets. And that inequality led to schools just closing down completely and then having to spend time not working on their curriculum, but doing digital needs assessments to figure out which students had what and what providers were available to them. Then schools did the Herculean task of actually providing access. So doing gigantic school-sponsored contracts where they're paying for students' home internet access and brokering these deals with various ISPs, many times multiple ISPs, because not every school district is covered by just one. This is a lot of pre-work that is placed on an institution that is not typically managing this type of work. It slowed down the progress of their distance learning curriculum. It slowed down the rollout of distance learning. And in some places, it completely transformed what would be eventually available as education to a community. So it's really important that when we're thinking through the investments we want to make in technology, that we meet the needs on the ground today, and that we also build so that we don't have to rebuild in a short span of time. Now, the second piece of that is that technology is not just in the ground, is not just the only piece of closing the digital divide and ensuring that communities have access. You also need to make sure that you meet their digital inclusion needs. For folks who have been persistently in the digital divide, there are a whole host of barriers that they've experienced that have put them there. In part, poverty is one piece of it, and overcoming cost can be very helpful to getting people online. But poverty is not the only piece, and cost is not the only piece. It's important to have information that's available in training. It's important that there's access to both devices and consistent cost support. And then wrapping all of these pieces together through a trusted institution is also really important. Not every provider is well received within their community. Many folks who are in the digital divide are very skeptical of signing up for contracts with telecommunications providers, even if they ultimately have no cost borne to themselves. They might be worried about giving up their information. They might be concerned about their privacy. And so it takes trusted institutions to help thaw some of those concerns and overcome them to make sure that people actually take advantage of the cost supports that might be in place. And then also have the information and the training and the guidance to actually best utilize technology. And it's important that, especially in the context of families, if we're talking about supporting K-12 education for children with these types of online supports, that you consider the caregivers that will be supporting these children as well. So when you're rolling out a program where you are working with children, that can be a really effective way of helping close the digital divide. Trusted institution like a school, you have a really important resonating use case like education. However, if you don't work with the families as well as the students to make sure that all those digital inclusion supports are available, then you'll be leaving out a really big support out of the puzzle. So it's really important that we consider the whole family and the whole household when we're thinking through our digital inclusion supports. When government and providers work together to keep these essential uses in mind, these tech specs in mind, and the community as a whole, then I think you can build towards developing a very equitable and fair broadband future for your community and taking advantage of the resilience that these technologies offer. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Amina. Indeed, you have opened our hearts and our heads with hope. We know that now there is hope. If only governments, in addition of designing the appropriate environment suitable for parenting, they do as well the same with the money and funds by investing them wisely and to the purpose of everyone. Thank you very much for these insights. Our next speaker, it's Mary Dozier, who is professor of psychological and brain sciences at the University of Delaware. For over the last 25 years, she has studied the development of young children in foster care. Along with graduate students and research team, she has developed an intervention, attachment and behavioral catch-up that targets specific issues that have been identified as problematic for young children. She will now elaborate more on these points. And Professor Dozier, the mic is yours. Thank you.
Hello, sorry, you have to mute yourself.
My bad. So my apologies, please. So we've developed this program called Attachment and Biobehavioral Catch-up, as was just mentioned. Oh, first, I just want to say wonderful talks. I'm delighted to be part of this panel, and thank you so much for attending. So we've developed this program over the last 25 years called Attachment and Biobehavioral Catch-up, and it is implemented through 10 sessions in the home. What this focuses on is 3 parenting behaviors and 3 parenting behaviors only. We help parents provide nurturance when children are distressed, help parents to follow their young children's lead, and to avoid frightening behavior at all times. Now, what we know is that these 3 behaviors are really critical to developing brain connections and then building brain circuits, and ultimately, really the development of the brain. So what we know is that this 10-session intervention, Attachment and Biobehavioral Catch-up, enhances child behavioral and brain development. We see effects on children developing more secure attachments, on their production of the steroid hormone cortisol, on children's being able to sit still when they need to in school, or inhibitory control, on DNA methylation, and on brain development. Here's a list of a variety of findings across the developmental spectrum. So what you might wonder is, how could this happen? How could a 10-session program change children's brain and behavior so fundamentally over time? Well, we have developed a very effective way of supporting parents in developing these nurturing and following the lead behaviors. And in particular, what we do is make in-the-moment comments regarding these behaviors. I want to show you an example here. This is a child who's quite fussy, and you can imagine as the parent, it would be tough to stay with nurturance in this example. And listen to what the parent coach says.
Okay.
So that sounded like perhaps just a casual conversation that the parent coach is having, but it's actually doing a variety of things. You can imagine first, it's supporting the parent, helping her feel empowered, feel good about the way in which she parents, but it's doing things very specifically to support this nurturance behavior. It's describing the behavior specifically, and it's linking it to the intervention target of nurturance and linking it to a child outcome. And so we consider in the moment comments as the active ingredient of the intervention. And what we know from our research in a variety of ways is that these in the moment comments lead to parents nurturing, following the lead, and avoiding harsh and frightening behaviors. And then what we know is that these behaviors of the parent enhance child outcomes. So you can imagine then where we have in the moment comments, which are delivered in the home to parents, that when COVID hits, you wonder, well, what do we do with this intervention? And we've got very vulnerable parents that we're working with. So we certainly want to make services available, but we had to pivot very quickly, as has been described by others as well. What we wondered is, would ABC still be effective? Would parent coaches still be able to make these comments in the moment? And then just how to do this. Things like, will parents have access to internet, which to our surprise, most parents did or became available, partly because of needing it for school access and so forth. Would parents have phones? Not many people had laptops or tablets, but nearly all of our parents had telephones that they could video conference with. And then there were certainly lots of tweaks that we made, but one little tweak was just providing parents with a phone stand so that they wouldn't have to hold their phone up like this, but rather they could put their phone at a distance and we could observe. I want to show you here an example that doesn't look all that different from what you saw in person with regard to a comment.
Something, but I think that helps a lot is like, she reached for you. She made maybe a slightly fussy noise, hard to tell, and you just picked her up right away. That's perfect. When in doubt, nurture.
In a way, that's just shocking that on this little phone, the parent coach could both see that, make a comment, but the parent could receive that, could hear that. And again, our comments are very specific. We're not just talking about it. We are coding these things as they fit with each of these components. And here she described it and she linked it to the target. And what we want to see in general is that we want to see at least one comment per minute. And if you think of that, we're making 60 comments across an hour. And these comments really provide parents very specific feedback on their behavior in ways that are then going to lead to change. And what we see through 510 sessions, and this is national and international, is that we see they're above that. They're about 1.39 observed comments per minute. And they're including these components. We want to see at least one of the components. We don't want to just say, wow, that was great that you did that. We want to have them describe, relate it to a target, relate it to an outcome. And we see 1.38, which is above what we want to see. So we're delighted with this. We also see changes in behavior of the parent, which is what we care about at the bottom line. And what we see at the pre-intervention is parents hovering right around the insensitive. This is a 5-point scale, insensitive to sensitive for a mean. And we see a large effect size from pre to post intervention in terms of their sensitivity. And again, a decrease in intrusiveness from pre-intervention to post intervention. So we're really delighted with that. And to end, I just want to show you a quick video of a mom and a baby at pre-intervention, where this child is just not engaged with her world or her toys or anything else. It's somewhat troubling. Now, what I'll mention is that mom is living in a motel room with her child. And this doesn't change from pre-intervention to post-intervention. So she's still living in a crummy motel room. But what I think you'll see is this child's world has fundamentally changed because the mother has changed. I'm just going to show you a little piece of this.
Well, I don't love you much, do I? Just more than human tongue can tell, and that's all. See how it sparkles in my eye. I couldn't hide it if I tried. That's right, I don't love you much, do I? Just more than anything else in this whole world. Well, I don't love you much, do I?
So I think that that video is just really a compelling anecdote of how much an infant's world can change when their parent changes. And here's our book and our website. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mary. It was quite interesting and overwhelming to see how when parents do change for better, they can transform the environment and have a good, very good and lasting impact on the child. Thank you very much for giving us this insight. Our next speaker will be Jessica Navarro. She is a PhD candidate in the Department of Human Development and Family Studies at the University of North Carolina in Greensboro. Her research interest centers on family and technology, in particular, the impact of technology on parent-child relationship. She also served as a rapporteur for the focal group on families and technologies convened in preparation of the 30th anniversary of the International Year of the Family. She will tell us more about what she has discovered. Jessica, I hand over to you.
Thank you so much, Olivier. Yes, I'm going to share the focus group findings, and I just want to say that so many of the presentations today have discussed what I'm going to be talking about, unsurprisingly, as these are the mega trends, but hopefully this will serve to sort of summarize and emphasize the key points that were raised earlier. So in January, the IFFD held an online focus group with participants from all over the world, experts in technology and families. And again, this was in anticipation of the 30th anniversary of the International Year of the Family in 2024. And all participants were given the 8 questions ahead of time. And ultimately, these all sort of centered around the idea of how does technology shape the lives of children and families in the 21st century? So the first question, should the universal coverage of the internet be considered a human right? And I think we've heard about this already today, but yes, all the participants agreed that it should be a human right, that access to the internet is incredibly important for education, employment, healthcare, global collaboration, as COVID-19 has shown. And as Amina touched on, that the telecommunications infrastructure is crucial for that. And in addition to that telecommunications infrastructure, the training is equally important. This was a key part of this conversation, that societies must provide training to increase citizens' digital literacy in conjunction with access. And that if appropriately implemented, as Amina discussed as well, this has the potential to reduce disparities. The second question was, what are the best indicators to measure households' access to new technologies? And as Susan touched on this earlier, broadband access in terms of household level, the proportion of households with broadband access is one of the most commonly used measures. And it's good, it's important, but it can be somewhat misleading. And that's because it's really not getting at what's happening in the home. So what equipment is available to access the internet and to participate? Are there computers? Are there smartphones? We know that particularly for children accessing classrooms on smartphones is much more difficult. Creating a CV or a resume on a smartphone is much more difficult than a computer. We also want to look at the number of devices per person in the household. One computer for 8 people is very different than 1 to 1. Related to that, what are the digital needs of the people in the home? Are there lots of people who are telecommuting? Are there lots of people using it for education to attend classes? And then also, what are the digital skills and knowledge of the people in the home? As Amina touched on, the bandwidth question is incredibly important. Do you have the bandwidth to be able to do what you need to do? And then also from a more global perspective, what are some of the social norms related to access? We know that in some countries, women, for example, are not allowed to access the internet in the same way that men. How does this impact access? The third question, does teleworking contribute to work-family balance, or is it just a way to work more? I'm sure my children are gonna barge in here at any moment, but we talked a lot about the positive and negative affordances of teleworking. You know, I think Zach touched on this as well, but just the flexibility, being able to not spend a lot of time commuting, the efficiency of it, and also that it opens opportunities for people with impairments who might not have been able to access the same employment opportunities. From a negative perspective, we are seeing reduced social interaction. Parents are juggling multiple roles at the same time, and this boundary between work and home becomes, you know, much more difficult to discern. People also might have problems logging out. And again, Zach talked about this, but just the COVID-19 implications of this have really amplified and showed us what's going on. Who is this impacting more so? And we're seeing that women are disproportionately burdened. Women are doing more childcare. They're also working from home. But again, you know, this is really sort of a class and North-centered question for a lot of people in working class. You know, telecommuting, remote work isn't an option, and then that's also true for people in low and middle income countries. We did talk about the importance of the government and organizations really being responsible for setting guidelines for citizens and employees and creating a culture where people are able to log out. Number 4, can the remote learning experiences of COVID-19 help to improve education? Talked about this today. Yes, I mean, we have so many lessons to carry forward. One of the big themes of this question was really that innovation needs to be driven by pedagogy. There must be a theoretical framework under which these decisions are made. We talked a lot about a greater emphasis on socio-emotional well-being in the online classrooms, not just in terms of education related to socio-emotional well-being, but also teachers being able to check in with students one-on-one, how they're doing, really to get a sense of how they're being impacted. We talked a lot about digital inclusion. How can we incorporate everybody in remote learning contexts? We must consider people who have low connectivity. We have to think about access to the internet and access to digital devices, all things we've talked about previously today. We did say from a developmental perspective, we need to think about, is this is appropriate for younger learners? And for educators and policymakers to really think about training for teachers in terms of creating these online classrooms, but then also the resources to back that up. The 5th question, which specific policies can help to bridge the intergenerational digital divide? This question wasn't quite as prolific as the other questions, I think in part because we need more research on this issue. But we did talk about the importance of access and training for older generations and the positive outcomes of a number of programs that look at intergenerational programming, where younger citizens are working with older adults in community centers to really help not only increase education, but also communication across generations. We did talk about how it's incredibly important for education to be around technology to be included for family professionals, for people working directly with families, so that they can help implement that. But that also these intergenerational differences are also amplified by socioeconomic disparities. The 6th question, should coding be introduced as a classroom subject like other languages? We agreed that it wasn't a language, but that it was a very useful skill. But to be able to use that skill, you have to have the access and you have to have the devices. And we talked about technologies changing very frequently, particularly for young children who might be learning coding, that it might become, might change. And so rather than focusing on a specific language, to really focus on learning to learn to code. So understanding logic and computational thinking and having this sort of understand perspective rather than know. We did talk about the importance of offering these opportunities to a broader audience, which Zach touched on today, and encouraging students and all people really to be creators of content beyond coding, so that they're not just passive participants in the internet, but they're active creators of that. Again, we did talk about how this is a very North-centered perspective and how for many people, this literacy itself is important. The 7th question, what instruments should be developed to ban child abuse materials online? What tools can parents use? Ultimately, we really talked about how parents are the fail-safe against this, and that strong parent-child relationships, as Mary touched on today, are crucial and central. That parents need to be learning about online context themselves. I think Amina touched on this. Common Sense Media is a great resource. Parents discussing the risks and benefits with their children, and being sources of advice and support that their child can go to when they have questions, when they have concerns. And that teachers and educators themselves are sources of this as well. It's not just parents. And ultimately, we need to really push industry and policymakers to take responsibility and create safe spaces for children and families online. The final question was just sort of additional topics that people wanted to bring up. We did discuss a concern that the internet could further exacerbate existing socioeconomic disparities, and that we need to look for opportunities for training beyond children and adolescents. We need to be looking for people who are unemployed, people who wish to change positions, as Zach touched on today, and also for school dropouts, creating opportunities where they can learn really invaluable skills. And again, that the training of family professionals related to technology is so important because they're the ones working directly with families. So thank you very much. I'm going to end my share.
Thank you very much, Desika. With this, we have listened to all our panelists, and I believe that you have learned a lot. And while they were speaking, there were many questions who were asked. So we are going to share these questions with the panelists. And in order to give the chance to ask all the questions, each panelist who will be receiving the question could be maybe elaborate on the question shorter so that we can ask many questions. So Suzanne, as our keynote speaker, will be opening the floor. So Suzanne, there is a question from Alex Vasquez, which states, how can parents protect their children from violence and age inappropriate content online while respecting their privacy and freedom? Can you hear me?
There we go.
Thank you.
As I've been thinking about this, again, I'll be brief, but complex in that the easy thing that we think about are monitoring apps and devices and that sort of thing that parents would use. The research doesn't really bear out that they're the most effective for keeping children safe. Again, it comes more to the relationship and teaching. Also, I believe parents know their individual child. They'll put a monitoring app for one child who will hack it. Another child will be vulnerable and feel very safe by having a monitoring app. So again, I believe that it's more embedded within the relationship and from how parents nurture and guide. And then finally, in terms of advocacy, we all should be doing this, but we can empower parents to be advocates, to have a safer internet for their children. So yes, technical devices to protect children, but really I believe it comes down to the relationship and to the teaching and knowing individual children and then being a good advocate.
Thank you very much, Suzanne. Another question is, this question is from Ben Freer from the New York NGO committee, and it's as well for Suzanne. What will be the most effective ways to motivate actions on access to the internet and help those with a lesser economic means?
Well, that's a huge question. And I think we all could weigh in. But I think if I focus in on motivating action, I would say to take a look at what families and children are being deprived from and really hit on that. I think we have a tendency, because we all use our devices so easily, that when we hear access, we're thinking, oh, somebody can play Candy Crush on their phone, when really what we're talking about is access to essential services, access to education and so forth. So I think motivating action is going to be getting to the heart of where the deprivation leads to, so that there will be a collective interest in offering that. Yeah, so I would say, without getting too specific into the nuts and bolts of creating an internet infrastructure, and certainly Amina and others have touched on some of those, I would say that we help people face the challenges that they have in resources, also looking at politics, all of those forces that sort of stand in the way to our providing these things at a macro level, but really getting to the heart so people understand truly what is being improved when we engage access.
Thank you very much, Suzanne.
Olivier, is everything okay? I think Renata,
Can we just go to one of the questions that was listed on, perhaps from Amina?
Hello?
Do you- oh,
Yes.
yes, Olivier, we can hear you now.
Sorry, I'm back now. So somebody touched my my cable, unfortunately. This is the okay. The next question is for Zach, because after listening Suzanne about how to make internet available, Ben asks again, what are the initiatives that Code Academy can do to help the communities with limited means? And this is becoming more practical from a player, like a stakeholder like you.
Yeah, so great question. We've done a lot of work over the course of the past several years with a lot of different NGOs and organizations on the front lines to help people that maybe don't have access to education get it. So that's everything from working with different parts of the UN, for instance, to distribute free Code Academy licenses, or over the course of the past year, we've worked with governments in the US and elsewhere to give free education, free access to Code Academy to populations that otherwise might not be able to afford it. And so generally that's a public-private partnership working directly with government or NGOs in order for those organizations to best distribute and figure out who needs the aid, assistance, and education. And then we help in actually kind of managing that education process. So lots of opportunities to work together on extending access like that.
Thank you very much. This is quite interesting. Our next question goes to Amina, and is from Ignacio Socias. You would like to know, what are the resources useful for parents to keep updated about new products and contents for the children that they are using, and how can they keep track on them? Because as we all know, the speed at which apps or products are being delivered, they are really, really fast for us.
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, at Common Sense, we've developed some tools in a few different sectors. So we have a platform called Wide Open Schools that you can look up online, wideopenschools.org, that offers information for caregivers and teachers around distance learning. So there's a lot of information about sort of vetted distance learning tools. And then another resource, which is more about sort of general kids media. So that can be games and apps and other stuff that's online. That's at our main website, which is commonsensemedia.org. And so there are ratings and reviews. There's parent advice there as well. And that can be a helpful guide. But also, I think just engaging within your own community and talking to other parents and caregivers to understand, what they're experiencing and what they're running across, if they've had issues with the product or if they're seeing like a desire for a particular product so that you can start to sort of dig into this early. Always having open communication with your kids, and then trying to be in the same room as your kids when they're using technology is also really important, just to get a sense of how they're engaging with it and being there just to provide them with support. Technology doesn't always have to be like an argument or a problem. And so being in the room with them can be sort of helpful and make you more of a resource to your child if they see you as a partner, as opposed to sort of, you know, the hand always saying stop. So those would be some of the pieces of advice that I think we have available, and I hope that answered the question.
Thank you very much. The next question is for Zach. It's from Richard Jordan from the Civil Society representative at the UN. Its question states as follows: how can the UN commemoration of Day for Women and Girls in Science amplify your outreach? Now we are falling into the gender equity.
I think, you know, great question. I think we look a lot at, you know, trying to make sure that populations that traditionally have not been involved in computer science and technology do so. And so we've worked with a bunch of nonprofits, like an organization called Code Art and Code with Clossie, to promote computer science education among young women. And would obviously love to work with different parts of the UN that are doing that kind of organization for Day for Women and Girls in Science as well. So I think, you know, whatever ways it is possible to collaborate, I think we're eager to kind of expose, obviously, what the UN is doing to, you know, to inspire more women and girls to get into careers of science, and hopefully there are ways for us to work together.
I hope that Jordan got the answer. The next question is for Amina. It's from the New York NGO Committee on the Family. And this is a question: do you have recommendation on how to engage with policymakers to promote investment in technologies infrastructure by governments? Which is a sort of a magic stick, so that when you use it, you can have everything done perfectly.
Yeah, it's a great question. You know, many of our organizations have real insight into why technology is important and how it interacts on, you know, the issues of concern that you work on. Being able to gather up that research and really highlighting the benefits that are gained by technology, but then also what is lost, and then being able to quantify that in terms that I think policymakers are responsive to, so that they actually understand what are the dollars lost. So for one example, you know, what we found really effective was to cost out, you know, what it took to close the K-12 digital divide in the United States for the first year, and then annually, and then compare that against the lost GDP when you don't connect those students. And, you know, there's a pretty big disparity. It was $22 billion a year lost GDP versus $4 billion annual investment. So it made it pretty clear that, you know, you were making a difficult, potentially poor choice if you didn't close the digital divide for students. Being able to lay that out, I think, is really useful. And then one more thing is, if you're unable to do those cost estimates, just to provide the tech specs of what you need right now for the most robust program that you're working on. So for example, we drilled down on tech specs for distance learning and identified 210 as sort of our target for high quality distance learning, for synchronous distance learning. We specifically chose something that was hard to achieve because we didn't want to water down that tech spec, because ultimately that specification helps drive the types of investments that policymakers will make. So build your technical specifications around your sort of ideal program, and then offer those up to policymakers as well.
Thank you very much. Mary, the next question is yours. It's from Lena Walsh. And this is a question: how to help adolescents exposed to violence online, because we have noticed that you have a sort of magic tool to help change the toddlers. How can you do the same on adolescents?
You know, that's such an important question. And the problem is that I, as a researcher, am really constrained to deal with what I've got expertise on. And what I've got expertise on is infancy and young childhood. So, you know, I think that there's the possibility for interventions for older children, but that's, I think other people might be able to address that better than I could.
Okay, and this is, I believe, the last insights. And I would like to thank all the participants who have been staying with us from the beginning on UN Web TV and on the Facebook Live. And I believe you have learned a lot. On behalf of the Focal Point on Family, I would like to thank IFFD and the New York NGO Committee on the Family and all the other stakeholders who have helped to make this event a success. Last but not the least, IFFD is celebrating today its 10th anniversary of the reclassification from special to general consultant status at the UN Economic and Social Council. On this occasion, we are going to have a nice event, which is starting at 12 New York time or 4 or 2 p.m. Central European time. You'll receive the link in the chat box to join this event. And why should you join? As we mentioned to you, IFFD is active in 70 countries, 70. And come and join us to see who is behind this work in 70 countries and meet the people who are making our advocacy and our groundwork worldwide. You can join us again to discover the past, the present, and the future of the largest parenting education network in the world. And you will discover how the pandemic has helped the team to grow stronger and stronger. I wish to all the participants a happy International Day of Families, and stay well, stay safe. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Can we have a picture before we leave?
Sure.